I am so glad you convinced me that the family car should be the Defender 110. It is so beautiful inside, it's so comfortable, and it just feels indestructible.
Yes, it really is. I've been waiting a long time for the new model to come out. The Defender 110, I'm telling you, it's my favorite car of all times. It's my third one. You know, I have stories of going off road. The guy managed the group. He was like, "What are you doing in this beautiful car?" I'm like, "I'm going off road." He's like, "Are you sure? Because you can use one of ours." And then they look like Mad Max cars. I'm like, no, we're going to do this. And he was shocked.
Wow. Well, it's great because the Defender has been reimagined for 21st century adventure, and its unparalleled off-road ability as well as its robust interior are invaluable whether you're headed towards uncharted territory or just a weekend of exploration. The Defender 110 tackles challenging surroundings with absolute confidence. The SUV conveys strength outside and in, featuring peerless technology like an intuitive driver display and an award-winning infotainment system. That's my favorite part, to keep you connected no matter where the journey takes you. Adventure is unique to everyone, and so is the Defender. Choose from the two-door Defender 90, the four-door Defender 110, or the larger Defender 130 with the ability to seat up to 8 passengers. You'll find uncompromising performance in all three. So pack up and go even further with the Defender 110. Learn more at LandRoverUSA.com/Defender.
These days, we're all investors, trying to be smart with our money despite our worst impulses. But at iShares, we believe that deep down inside of every investor is a better investor. One that's just waiting to be let out. Explore iShares ETFs and insights and let your best investor out. Visit iShares.com for more information.
This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show on the Stansberry Radio Network.
This is James Altucher. I have Dan Ariely on the phone, author of Predictably Irrational, the honest truth about dishonesty, and the upside of irrationality. All of these subjects, Dan, I'm totally an expert on, having been completely irrational and dishonest for most of my life. So welcome to the show.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So Dan, what I kind of you came at a lot of these issues, irrational thinking, the honest truth about dishonesty. You come at it from a huge academic point of view. You did all this research. You uncovered all the ways we figure, or many of the ways we think irrationally. But I want to kind of also look and explore the upside of irrationality. In a sense, how can the listeners take advantage of the fact that we all think irrationally to improve their lives by maybe thinking more rationally, and also maybe take advantage of the fact that other people, no matter what, are going to be mostly thinking irrationally. So what are some of the ways we think irrationally that you cover in your book?
So there are many ways in which we think irrationally. Probably the best one to think about as a starting point is emotions. So think about how emotions work. Emotions are they're evoked by something from the outside. And once they get started, they basically create an action plan that you almost have to follow. And you can see why emotions in this way are reasonable to have. So, for example, imagine that you're an animal in the jungle 10,000 years ago, and all of a sudden you see a tiger. What do you want to do? Do you want to start thinking about the cost and benefit, running versus staying? No, you want to start running as fast as possible. And that's what emotions do, is you see something, it evokes an emotion, and then you just get an action plan that says, run as fast as you can. Now, today we don't have tigers anymore, but we still have emotions, and they still control us in many ways. And the reason it's good to think about emotions this way is because you see how they are beneficial, even if they're not optimal.
Well, and Dan, let me ask, there also were probably more cases where we irrationally ran. So even in the jungle, if we just heard the leaves rustling in an unusual way, we might irrationally think it was a tiger, and we'd start running because, that was a better way to protect ourselves in general, rather than wait to confirm that it was a tiger.
That's right, and you can see how this is also sensible, right? Because you might make mistakes from time to time, but the cost of running when there's no tiger is the cost of running. The cost of staying when there is a tiger is a very high cost.
Right.
Right.
So it's not necessarily irrational, although short term it might seem irrational.
So this is a question of how we think about rationality and irrationality. So it's certainly a mistake in terms of thinking about the particular action, but you could see how it is sensible. So emotions emotions in general are kind of good rules of thumbs for how to behave, a long time ago, but they're not necessarily correct for each individual time that you behave. And rationality, you would need something that is actually accurate every time. But that's just emotion. Let's just switch to another example. Think about something like money. Money is
I think about money all the time, so this is a good example.
Money is a relatively new invention. It's actually difficult to think about money. So what is money all about? Money is all about opportunity cost, right? Every time you do one thing, you're giving up the opportunity to do something else. You buy a cup of coffee, you're not going to do something else. You're buying a car, you're not going to do something else. So we went a while ago to a Toyota car dealership, and we asked people, we said, what would happen if you go ahead and buy this car today? What would you not be able to do? And people had no answer. Why? Because they never thought about it. But then we pushed them and we said, look, something would have to give. What would give? And the most people told us was that if they're going to buy a Toyota, they can't buy a Honda. So people gave us a substitution within the same time frame in the same product category. What we would have wanted people to say is that this would be 3 weeks of vacation over the next 3 years and 200 lattes and 70 books and so on. So the thing with money is that money is a really interesting invention. It's an amazing invention. It advances society in many ways, right? We can specialize, we can save. Lots of wonderful things happen because we have money. But at the same time, it's hard for us to think about money, and because it's hard for us to think about it the right way, we think about it the wrong way, and we make lots of mistakes.
I think, because money is such a relatively recent invention, a lot of the examples actually in predictably irrational, it seems to me, sort of refer to the fact that it's hard for us to value things based on supply and demand. And a lot of irrational thinking involves what's the difference between where we value something and where supply and demand would value something. And this is extremely useful for like marketing and sales, for instance.
That's exactly the point. So, and I'll give you the following example, just to think about. Imagine that you're coming to try to park, and you find an empty parking meter, and you parked your car, and you're trying to park, and you don't have a quarter. And I pass by, and you say, excuse me, do you have a quarter? And I say, yes, I have a quarter. But I'll tell you what, I want $1.50 for this quarter, or I want $1 for this quarter. Would you give it to me, or would you say, I'll take my risk, I will risk it and see if I can not get a ticket? Most people say, I'm not going to overpay you, I'll take the risk. Case number 2 is the same thing. I pass by, you ask me if I have a quarter, and I say, look, I don't have a quarter, but there's a bank 3 blocks down the street. I'll run as fast as I can to this bank. I will get a quarter for you. I will run as fast as I can back. But if I do this, I would like you to pay me $1 for my trouble. And now, most likely, you would say, great, it's a great deal. You get somebody to run 3 blocks there and 3 blocks back for you for only 75 cents. Now, the reality is that in both cases, what you're getting is a quarter for $1. But in the case where I run, you feel like it's a good deal. In the case where I just give it to you and charge you, you feel like you've been gouged. And you can think about this as a good example of something that is not about the value of what we're getting. It's about how do we come to evaluate it. And something that comes up to evaluation by knowing how much effort went into it is evaluated in a much higher way.
Can I ask Dan? Could this
By the way,
explain?
let me before we do this, let me just give you some advice.
Sure.
Now think about your show, right? If you want people to evaluate this in a higher way, what would you have to do if you think about the lesson from this example from parking? You would have to basically for people to realize how hard you're working on this, right? How much effort you've put into it, how much time it takes you to book your guest and read what they're working on and think about it and prepare everything, and that would create a much higher evaluation of the final outcome.
That's a very good description, actually, of how I prepare.
Very good.
So let me ask this: Is this so? There's this study where these guys sold a bunch of items they bought in garage sales on eBay, and they sold them for a certain price, and then they bought the same batch of items and they sold them again on eBay, but this time they put a story under each one, kind of describing how they got the item, what the history of the item, and so on, and they got, on the eBay auction system, basically the price was about 3 times higher, the final sale. So would you say this is related to that?
So this is a story about, this is a study by Rob Walker. And what Rob did was he went on eBay and he bought some real junk. He bought stuff, I think, in general, for less than $5. Some things were even 30 cents and 50 cents and so on. And then he got some people to write stories about them, and then resold them on eBay. And the amount was amazingly different. So, for example, there was a particular little plastic gun that he bought for $56. And later on, he sold it for $36. So there was a particular little something that you put on your desk that he bought for $1.49 and sold for $56. There were things that he it was just tremendously different. There was a little statue of a rhinoceros that he bought for $1 and sold it for $57. The whole thing was incredible. But this was about the fact that what we're consuming at the end of the day is not just the item in question. The consumption experience is actually very complex. We're consuming stuff from our minds at the moment of consumption. We're consuming a story. We're consuming our belief. We're consuming a sense of justice. Imagine two worlds. In one world, you are sitting by your computer and drinking grape juice, and you're working very hard and you're focusing on your work. In the second one, you're sitting in Napa Valley in one of those wine tasting rooms, and somebody is telling you about the aroma and the grapes and the soil and the sun and when it was picked and so on, and you're drinking the same grape juice from a small cup, and you swirl it around and you smell it and so on. Those are not the same experiences, right? Those are vastly different experiences, and it's because we're not experiencing just the taste on our mouth. We're experiencing something very different from that.
So it's interesting. So when you add story, when you kind of document the process of, let's say, the creation of a product or what I'm going to do to provide you a service or whatever, that almost justifies charging more. It kind of increases the demand and the supply and demand equation, even though that might be irrational because the outcome's the same.
That's right, and it's a question of what do you mean by justified. Justified is a complex question about your sense of justice and so on. But there's no question that a story changes the experience. So if you say, what do people get from a cup of coffee that they don't know nothing about it versus what are they getting from a cup of coffee that they have a story around it, the story one does give people more pleasure. It's actually more valuable.
Well, here's another example. Let's say I buy one of your books on your website. You sell me directly the book, or I can go to Amazon and buy your book there, and maybe I even pay more because I'm paying for shipping or whatever. It turns out that people are much more likely to buy on a trusted site like Amazon than buy on your site, where they don't necessarily know even though you're, a well-known person and professor and trusted, they don't, somehow Amazon is a more trusted site just because it sells billions of products, and so
So
people are more likely to buy there.
yeah, and there's other things about that, right? So I'm not sure if people would trust me less than Amazon, that I'm, a person of my word. But there's other parties involved, right? There's speed of shipping, there's expertise in shipping, there's what do you do with if something gets damaged. And I think people should trust Amazon more than me. Maybe not not in terms of, if I promise something, I would probably do my best to do it, and Amazon would, maybe our reputation. But the thing is that buying a product and shipping it requires lots of other parties as well. And the question is, which one of us, me or Amazon, has more control over the shipping services? And of course, the answer is Amazon. Which one of us knows how to deal better with mistakes? It's probably Amazon. So I think people should trust Amazon to a higher degree. So Amazon, by the virtue of doing it a lot and dealing with third parties a lot, has gotten very, very good at this. So when you say trust, there's a question of you trust who for what. Also, I think that people should trust me to a high degree, that I know what I'm talking about when I talk about behavioral economics, but people should not necessarily trust me when I come to talk about wine or talk about pens or something else.
Although it's funny, often I think a source of irrational thinking for an individual is if you're good at one thing, people have a tendency to think that they're good at many things. So you see people, for instance, who and this has happened to me, you get wealth in one area of your life, and then you suddenly start investing in the stock market, and you lose everything.
Yeah.
So how do people kind of get more rational in their thinking?
So sadly, there's no single answer for that, right? There's lots of ways to be irrational, and there's no one way to fix it. Because what rationality demands from us is to think very deeply, very thoroughly all the time in a way that is really, really hard to accomplish. So there are all kinds of mechanisms to try and think in a better way. So let's take some mistakes that people make. One mistake could be texting while driving. When lots of people text and drive, it's clearly an incredibly stupid thing to do. You're likely to kill yourself. You're likely to kill other people, get injury. I mean, it's just a terrible thing to do, but people do it all the time. And you can say, how do we behave better? Can we get people to learn more about it? And once they would learn about it, they would realize it's a mistake and stop doing it. Well, that's not going to be the case. The barrier in texting and driving is not that we don't have the right information. That's not where the barrier is coming from.
Right, because we all know it's bad.
That's right. And the barrier there is that the phone is there and it is tempting. So when the phone is tempting, we misbehave. So what's the right solution there? The right solution is to basically create something that doesn't let people get to their phones, right? So if you basically said, okay, I'm going to turn off my phone every time I go into the car, or I will put my phone in the trunk or in the back seat. If the phone is going to vibrate next to you or ring next to you, the temptation is too high, and very few people would be able to resist this, right? This is equivalent to me coming to your office every day of the year and covering your desk every morning with hot donuts. What are the odds that after doing this for a year, you would not weigh more? The odds are very, very low. You'll be very tempted lots of the time and most likely misbehave in a bad way. So when it comes to temptation, the right way to try and fight it is not to assume that we can overcome temptation, but to basically reduce the prevalence of temptation in our lives. So that's one direction, right? And you can think about lots of personal lessons. You can say, okay, maybe I should just stop having cookies at home, because if I have cookies, I will just eat too many. Maybe it's okay to eat a cookie from time to time, but if I have a whole box at home, most likely I will misbehave. There's another element which has to do with habits. So habits are nature's way of getting us not to think about things every time, but to create a method of dealing with something. So, for example, you could say, what kind of good habits can I create? Think about something like toothbrushing, right? You don't think every day, oh, is this a good time to brush my teeth? Not a good time. Should I do it today? Not. You just get into the habit that says this is something good. People who exercise don't think every day, should I exercise? Not. They get into a habit. People who write, for example, it's really easy if you get into a habit that says you get into the office every day and the first hour you do is you just write and you don't do anything else before that.
So let's take that example. How do you how do you focus, at least initially, in the initial stages of building the habit, how do you make sure you're not kind of checking Facebook or email or whatever?
Yeah, so actually, of course, the goal of Facebook and email and so on is to tempt you all the time, and you have to resist temptation. In the beginning, it's going to be very tough. So I think if you said to yourself, oh, this is how I'm going to behave forever, this is going to be very, very tough to do. But if you said, okay, I'm just going to commit to doing this for a short while, maybe for 6 weeks, that's actually a little easier because you realize it's within your grasp. So what I would do, if we just take this example, is I would look at my calendar and I would schedule time for writing. I would schedule for time for writing, and then I would take the distractions like Facebook and email, and I would schedule time for them. Because right now, because we don't schedule time for Facebook and email, we do it every moment that nothing else is scheduled. But that's not the right thing. So I would say, from 8 to 9:30, I'm writing. From 9:30 to 10, I'm doing email. From 10 to 10:15, I'm doing Facebook or something like that. And now that I've scheduled it, it is more clear to me that if I'm doing it in the other time, I'm not doing what I've intended to do. So that's the kind of things I would try. But
so that's very interesting, because you're saying don't assume you could just automatically be rational, but actually schedule times for yourself to be irrational. So in this case, schedule times for the distractions.
The scheduled time for the distraction, first of all, I don't want people to live, just a life of misery, right? You have to have some fun in life, and, if people enjoy Facebook and talking to other people, that's okay. But the idea is that once you schedule time for Facebook, if you're doing Facebook in the amount that you planned or above that. And one of the big lessons, by the way, from social science in general and behavior economics is that the environment matters. That we behave as a function of the environment that we're in. So if we have an environment that supports good behavior, we'll behave well, and if it's an environment that points us into bad behavior, we'll behave poorly. So the trick is really to ask the question of how do we create an environment where we're likely to behave well. And the calendar could be part of it, how you set up your kitchen can be part of it, how do you set up your day, and so on. All of those are components of this.
But, also, so this kind of verges on self-help a little bit, but there's that saying, you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So if you're going to hang out with, let's say, all people who are way more than you, then chances are you're going to gain weight also.
Yeah, so we do look, there's a very nice stream of research on what's called social proof. And social proof is the idea that we look at the behavior of other people around us, and we look at their behavior as a guideline for what is acceptable behavior. And what's interesting about that research is that both it's very important, but also that we don't necessarily intuit how it works. So let me give you an example. So this is research by Noah Goldstein and his colleague, and they went to a group of people that live outside of LA. And we said, look, imagine that we had 3 ways to try and get people to stop using energy. We could tell them either this is something that you should do because it will save you money. Or we could tell them this is something that you should do because it's good for the environment. Or we could tell them this is something you should do because it's good because everybody else is doing it. So we could say money, environment, everybody else is doing it. And they asked people, what do you think would work? If you were going to predict which one of those would work, what do you think would work? And people said, I personally would be influenced by the environmental appeal. because that's the kind of person I am, a kind of a wonderful person who cares about the environment. My neighbors, they would be influenced by the money appeal because that's the kind of people they are. And nobody would care about what everybody else is doing. So people had the theory that it's all about what we are, either the environment, or saving the environment, or saving money. What actually happened? Well, they did that study. They actually waited 3 months, and they ran the study when a third of the people got one, the second or the third. And the only thing that matters was what everybody else was doing. So what's interesting here is that what everybody else is doing is incredibly important. We are very sensitive. We're very much herding animals, but we don't really predict that. We don't understand the extent to which we follow other people's behavior. We think that we are working according to reasons. So I say, what really motivates you? What really drives you? And you say, oh, I'm the kind of person who thinks deeply and, contemplate things and so on. And it could be either by these reasons or these reasons or these reasons. But we don't understand that many of our decisions are actually driven not by reasons, by reaction to all kinds of things, including what other people are doing.
So it's interesting because you've given so far two very valuable sales techniques. One is to sort of tell the story of the process or some story about your product or service, and that sort of drives up conceptually somehow the price in the buyer's mind. And the other thing is social proof is this sort of herd behavior. So from an evolutionary point of view, caring for animals is also a relatively new invention of the human species, as well as you point out, money. Saving money is a relatively new invention. But traveling with the herd is 3 million years old.
That's right, and it's often a good strategy, right? You could say, well, it's not always the case that other people know best, but from time to time, other people do know something. So in general, it is a good strategy.
Well, and if you didn't travel with the herd, you might be left behind when the wolves show up.
Yeah, that's right.
So for millions of years, it was a great strategy, and now it may or may not be a good strategy because the world's changed. But it's like an evolutionary blip. I'm wondering how much the overlap is between behavioral science and like evolutionary psychology.
Sorry, say it again.
I wonder how big the overlap is between behavioral science and evolutionary psychology, because it seems like you can explain things both ways.
So look, there's no question that we are a function of our evolutionary history. So this is, of course, the obvious. But the question of evolutionary psychology and behavioral economics, there are some differences between them. So evolutionary psychology is very much concerned with finding the evolutionary reasons for a particular behavior and proving that those indeed are the reasons. And of course, everything we do has an evolutionary history to it, but behavioral economics is not assuming that we can always identify it. One of the things about evolutionary psychology is that many times it's hard to prove particular points. So, Darwin had lots of finches, and you could look at 16 different finches and look at the width of their beak and so on. With people, we have only one type, basically. So, because of that, it's very hard for us to, in kind of a scientifically satisfying way, to say that we can actually track a particular behavior to evolutionary reason. We can say there's a story that is consistent with an evolutionary reason, but we can't really track it back. So, we can talk about money, and we can say, well, there's probably no reason for us to have developed any mechanisms that deal with money, but we can't prove it because we don't have another human being that was developed with money, and we don't have 2 million years to wait until we have more money in our history and so on. So evolutionary psychology is an incredibly important field, but there are many things that are hard to test empirically in that particular field.
I want to switch directions just a little bit because it's also going to be related to sales. But if you don't mind, I'd like to talk about your personal story, if that's okay.
Sure.
So why don't you describe how you kind of got into this area of behavioral science? Because I think the secret origin story of our superheroes is always fascinating to people.
I'm not sure how fascinating it is, but I was burned very badly many years ago, and I spent a long time.
How old were you?
I was almost 18, and I was burned in about 70% of my body, and I spent about 3 years in hospital. And hospitals are, I think of them as magnifying glass for human irrationality and stupidity. There's lots of terrible behaviors happen in hospital, and I learned a lot during that time. I learned how to think about pain and placebos and behavior and procedures and all kinds of things. But the thing that troubled me the most on those days was the question of bandage removal. So imagine you were a patient and somebody was in charge of taking your bandages off, and there were two basic strategies. They could rip the bandages off quickly, one after the other, or they could take them off slowly. The ripping approach would create tremendous momentary pain, but the duration in total would be lower, versus the slow ripping approach would take a long time, but you will not have the same intensity. And the question is, which one of those is better? So somebody had to take my bandages off every day. Which one of those is better? And the nurses believed in the quick ripping approach. They thought that this would create the lowest total amount of pain. That if you basically took, let's say half as much time, even if it was much more painful, that was a better approach, and therefore that's what they chose to do. And I didn't like that approach, and I was trying to argue with them, but they were in charge and they did what they thought was best. And then years later, when I started studying at the university, I decided to test this. And the way I tested it was I would bring people to the lab, and I would hurt them in different ways for different durations and profiles and intensities. And what I found was that the nurses were wrong. What I found was that, in fact, people don't incorporate the duration that much into their experience. You can take an experience, make it twice as long. You don't make it twice as painful. You take an experience, you make it a little bit more intense. Now you make it much more experienced. So the nurses were wrong in a systematic and predictable way, because they were focusing on minimizing the duration, and they should have focused on minimizing the intensity. And if you think about this, these are wonderful individuals with nothing but good intentions that were nevertheless getting things wrong for every patient, and they were doing it while thinking that they're serving their patient. But they were doing it because their gut intuitions were wrong, right? There was something inside of them that told them that the right approach is the ripping approach, and they kept on following that internal representation. So I, from that point on, I started thinking about all kinds of cases in which we think we know what's right. We think we know what's the best thing to do for our clients, our patients, whatever. But in fact, our intuitions are wrong. Our intuitions are not leading us in the right way, and because of that, even though we have good intentions, we end up doing lots and lots of mistakes.
So can I ask two things? One is, it seems like the reverse is also true about, where the same thing is true about happiness. So for instance, I can go to a movie for 2 hours and I'll be very happy, but going to a movie for 4 hours doesn't make me twice as happy. Maybe it'll make me just a little more happy or bored.
Yeah, so happiness is another one of those domains where people have bad intuitions about what will make them happy. And I think there's lots of things to talk about happiness, but one way to think about it is to think about mountain climbing, and I've used this example before. So if you look at books of famous mountain climbers and you say, what did these people write? they write just about misery, right? You look at these mountain climbers, and it doesn't seem like there's any moment of happiness in mountain climbing. In fact, it's all just misery and pain and challenges. There's not a single moment that you would say, "My goodness, this person is just delighted." But nevertheless, these people don't go down from the mountain and say, "Oh, this was the worst mistake of my life." No, they go down from the mountain. They try to recover because it's a dangerous, difficult sport, and then they go up again. And you say, "Okay, so what have we learned about happiness?" These people clearly either they like misery, or something about the definition of happiness is completely wrong. And I think that's actually what's happening here is our definition of happiness is wrong. Happiness is often not about momentary happiness. Happiness is often about a sense of meaning. And a sense of meaning doesn't come from regular joy. It comes from something else, including from things that are difficult. So if you ask the question of, is climbing a mountain making people happy? Not at the moment, but after they finish climbing it gives them a tremendous amount of satisfaction and reflection on their life in a very, very different way that is actually very important for them. So I do think that when people think about happiness, they have the wrong view. They don't understand how much of happiness is actually about fulfillment rather than sitting on the sofa drinking beer.
So when you were going through this experience of all this pain and the dealing with, your whole life changed, obviously. The burn affected not only your body, but your whole life. You were in a hospital for 3 years. How did you sort of find meaning coming out of the hospital and sort of bounce back as much as you could and move forward?
So there were many different stages, but right now I find meaning in an attempt to try and improve things. So I think of myself very much in the business of trying to find out mistakes that people make that we could maybe not solve, but improve on. So I get exposed to lots of human misery, and I look at poverty, and I look at malnutrition, and I look at just the stupid things we do to each other. I mean, if you look at the world and you ask yourself how much of the bad things that are happening in the world are things that we do to each other, it's really a lot, right? A lot of our misery is self-created. And I basically try to think about, how can we improve a little bit on this? And sometimes I talk to individuals, and sometimes I try to do things with government. Sometimes I try to do things with startups. But my intention is always to find out where mistakes are happening and how can we do to improve it. And by the way, when I left the hospital, I thought of trying to become a physician. So I saw lots of things I didn't like in hospital, and I said, let me try and fix it by becoming a physician. But because my hands are so badly burned, I can't possibly hold a scalpel or lots of things are difficult for me in that regard.
So you were 20 years old. Do you think that provided you kind of the meaning in life to uplift you? Like, was that enough? What happened when you were 20? So now you clearly have a lot of meaning and direction in your life. What were you thinking at 20? Was being a physician enough?
So first of all, when I got injured, I have to say that I had no idea how bad the injury was. So we all get burned at some point, and I thought, you get burned and it goes away. And I had a little bit more burns and a little deeper, but they'll go away at some point. I didn't understand that deep burns, never go away, right? The scar tissue never gets back to how you were before, and the scars are always, tough and so on. I'm actually going into treatment tomorrow, right? It's been many years, and I'm still things are still happening. So I think in the beginning I just had no idea of what my future would look like, and maybe
would they tell you and you wouldn't believe them, or would they not tell you?
Oh, they just didn't tell me. And I think it's probably for the best that they didn't tell me. So for a long time I really didn't know what to expect, and that was okay. And then later on, I think once I got better and I realized where things were going, I was actually quite depressed, right? So it was very, very unhappy. And then when I got over that initial part, I think that's the place where I started thinking about, what do I do with my life? And I think that part of it was wanting to have some control. Some of it was wanting not to have other people suffer in the same way, to fix a few things. But it certainly wasn't my initial perspective, right? In the beginning, it was just pain. Let me not think about it. Let me distract myself. Let me just think about tomorrow. My life was just consumed with nothing big in the beginning. It was just pain. Then it was, okay, it was going to go away. Then it was depression. Then it was trying to help. And I tried to become a physician, and only when they prevented me from doing this, I found another way. But I didn't think about it that that's going to be my way, but this became my way.
Because the reason I ask is, obviously not everybody goes through what you went through, but everybody goes through something. So let's say an entrepreneur fails at their business and their business goes bankrupt and they can't support their family and they're in their own pain and their own depression, and that's just one example. But, I wonder in general how people can bounce back to find mening and to you mentioned helping people was in various ways, either being a physician or psychologist or whatever. Being able to help people was what ultimately gave you some meaning.
Yeah, I think helping is probably one of the easiest ways to find meaning. I'm not sure it's the if you had to make a list of the most useful ones, I'm not sure if it's the most useful one, but I think it's one of the easiest ones because you can actually do something and you can see the improvement in other people's lives. So I think from that perspective, it is relatively easy to create. I think writing for me was another way to kind of get over things and sort things out. So actually, when I was in grad school, I sat and I wrote a book about my injury, and I spent a long time on it. And when I finished, I bounded one copy and I put it on the shelf, and I never looked at it again. I didn't write it for other people. I wrote it just for myself. But it was incredibly a healing process of kind of trying to collect my thoughts. And
that's interesting. Why didn't you publish that? Because that obviously would have helped people too.
It was. I actually didn't even write it for other people. I really kind of was just kind of wrote it more of a diary. I never thought about writing it for other people at the time. I just was consumed with all kinds of things in my own history and what happened and so on, and I just had the need to kind of try and write it down and sort it out and try to figure out all kinds of nuances about my own experience. So at that point, this was just felt like this was a good thing to do. Just for that, I haven't looked at it in forever. I'm not even sure if I wasn't completely useless as a writer at the time. So I don't know. But I did write on my blog. There's an essay called Painful Lessons that I wrote about some lessons I had about life in hospital that I felt was something that was useful for people to read. And I know that lots of people a lot of nurses in training, for example, told me that they've read this in school and so on. So I think it's a mix. I think everybody needs to find their own mix of what do you do for just your own sanity and your own understanding of what has happened to you, and what do you do in order to try and find meaning outside of yourself. There's no easy recipe.
I think when you talk about pain in your books, you bring up quite a bit the placebo effect. That even if somebody comes to you and says, "Okay, here's a pill that's going to cure your pain," there is some validity. It actually will make you think for a short period of time that you're without pain in some cases.
Yeah, and placebo is really amazing. So I first was introduced to placebo in hospital. So when I was in hospital, narcotics were not as good as they are now. The last 10 years have been tremendous improvements in narcotics, but we would mostly get morphine. And morphine is a great drug, but you can't give people too much of it for all kinds of reasons. They were also afraid that we will become addicts. So we had a budget of how much morphine we could take, and every day we had the budget, and the doctors and nurses would allow us to decide when we want to take each of the injections. So let's say we could take 6 injections a day. When exactly do we want that? So I, of course, tracked every day how many injections I took and how many I had coming, and think about how to space it. But as a slightly obsessive person, I would also track the other people's injections. So what other people are taking, and from time to time at night, somebody would scream at night, and the nurse would go and give them an injection, and that person would quiet down. And sometimes I would realize that this person took more than their fair share. So I would call the nurse and I said, this person X, Y, or Z got more than their 6 injections. I want an extra one too. Why are they getting the extra one? And the first time that this happened, the nurse told me that she just gave that person a placebo, basically a IV fluid, water with some salt, and no real medications. And this is shocking because, when you hear about placebo in the way that you and I are talking about it right now, it sounds so distant and foreign. But when you're experiencing pain and the people in the room next to you are experiencing just the same intensity of pain, and all of a sudden I tell you that they got the injection with nothing and they went to sleep quietly, that's just a shocking experience. But then I read about placebo, and placebo is probably the best way to think about the connection between body and mind. So here is what happens with placebo. You get a doctor to give you an injection, and that injection has nothing but IV fluid, but your body, your mind, think it's a painkiller. And as a result of that, in preparation, your body starts secreting a substance that is very much like morphine. So your body actually gets morphine coming from the injection. It's coming from your own body. Now, you can't just close your eyes and say, body, please give me some morphine. But the moment the physician injects you with something, you can start producing it. And that's the amazing thing about placebo, is that your body is always trying to anticipate the future and trying to prepare for that future. And placebo is a place where something that actually has nothing in it is changing your expectations, and because of that is changing your physiology. So
and
you can imagine,
what if you knew you were taking a placebo? Would it have a similar effect or no effect at all?
So there's a recent result that shows that even if people tell you it's a placebo, it still works. Now, we don't know
to the same extent?
We don't know. We know it still works, but nobody did the study that compares the exact amount that it works and on which people and so on. I think it's fair to say that it will not work to the same extent. So, for example, we showed in some experiments that that if people pay more for a placebo, they think it's going to be more effective, and therefore it's actually more effective, and people pay less for it, they think it will be less effective, and because of that it is actually less effective. So expectations do play a role, and if you know it's a placebo, your expectation probably get reduced. So the way to think about it is that every time you think that something would be effective, there's basically a chance that this will actually become effective.
So how can I? It's almost like if I can master self-hypnosis or something, I can convince myself different actions I take are going to be more effective than they are going to be.
There's lots of ways to do it. One way to do it is to basically give yourself a language about a particular behavior and to make expectation more salient. So think about something as mundane as shaving and ask yourself whether you can make the experience better, right? If you start calling it my moment of caring in the morning, it will probably be a better experience if you call it my daily nuisance, right? And if you focus on that and you say to yourself, let me feel about how the razor is cutting the hair and how smooth the shaving cream feels and so on, you will probably do it better. And if you add some ceremonial elements to this, like a brush or aftershave or something like that, it might also make it more celebrated, more focused, more attention, and probably with higher quality.
So do you think like things like affirmations would work? Because that almost sounds like an affirmation.
So what exactly is affirmation? What do you exactly mean by that?
Like, today I'm going to be happier. And I tell myself, I look myself in the mirror in the morning, I say, I'm going to have a happy day today.
I am not sure that would work. I'm not sure that would work.
But
I
in the
think
same
that
sense, though, you're saying
affirmation,
my shaving experience is self-care, is better caring for me, so I'm going to be a better person. It's almost a similar thing.
So I think that the difference is that I think that if you focus on these general things, I'm just going to be happy, I think that's going to be a little hard. But I think that if you focus on particular specific experiences, that's going to be much easier.
Interesting.
So I think that happiness is a little bit too general to just create that. But I think if you say, okay, let me just enjoy this particular candy right now, or let me do something specific, that's going to be more likely. So I suspect that this is the case.
And also, then it sounds related to like mindfulness.
By the way,
like, I'm going to focus more.
I'm Jewish. I'm an expert in misery, not in happiness.
Well, okay, so let's talk about honesty and dishonesty. So I would gather that most people think they're in general honest people, but you have some results that suggest otherwise.
So first of all, yes, most people think of that they are wonderful, honest individuals, but when you actually ask people when was the last time they lied, they realize that they lie a lot. But most
how
people,
often do you think people lie per day?
Well, I think the best evidence we have is it happens about 3 times a day at least.
Like even white lies?
Including white lies, yeah.
Yes.
And most people think that most of their lies are white lies. And white lies are, the extreme case of white lies are white lies where they're just for the benefit of somebody else and they're actually at your expense. But actually, many white lies also help you, right? So kind of the classical white lie, honey, how do I look in that dress? Of course, you might say, I'm doing it for that other individual. But the truth is you might be actually doing it for yourself because you don't want to have a miserable evening or you don't want to face something else. So people think about the telling white lies, but the pure white lies that are just for the benefit of individuals, like you're like Robin Hood, right? You're suffering for yourself to make the other people better. They're not as common, and in fact, most of them we benefit from as well. So people lie a lot, we all lie a lot, and the thing about these lies is that what we do incredibly well is to lie and then rationalize that what we've done is actually okay. And that's an incredible skill. And what's so interesting is that all kinds of things help us to rationalize it. So things like everybody else is doing it is incredibly helpful, or that entity is deserving. And I'll tell you one story maybe to kind of emphasize that. So I own a vending machine, and at some point I put the vending machine in one of the big classrooms at MIT, in one of the class buildings at MIT, and I put a sign next to it saying, if the machine is broken, please call this number. And I set the price on the outside to say 75 cents, but on the inside, I set the price to say 0. So what would happen is you would put your money in, you would press the button, you would get your candy and the money back because the machine thought that the price was 0, so you get all your money back. So first of all, the question is, how many people called? And the answer is 0. Nobody called. And how many candies did people take? Most people took 3 or 4 candies. Nobody took 5.
So most people kept hitting the button.
That's right. Kept on putting money in and hitting the button, doing it 3 or 4 times. Now, nobody took 5, right? 5 would be stealing. It will be kind of too much. But 3 or 4 people could do, and they could rationalize it. And I think that what people did was they said to themselves something like, I remember a vending machine that took my money, didn't give me candy. This machine must be a close relative of that other one. I'm doing this just as a way to restore my vending karma. So basically, people were able to tell themselves a story about why this is okay. Now, this is pure stealing, right? You're stealing money and candy from somebody. There's no question that it's not your candy. But the ability to rationalize it is so easy that most people did not think of themselves as being thieves, even after stealing a candy. Now,
let me ask you this:
the same people, by the way, would not go to a candy store, to a grocery store, and steal a candy and go, even if they knew they wouldn't get caught. That would feel like stealing. But from the vending machine, under those conditions, it felt like that was actually okay.
Well, that's interesting. Let me ask you this: after that experience, like after they essentially steal 3 candies from your vending machine, are they more likely then later that day or later that week to lie more than if they hadn't stolen from the vending machine? So is lying in some sense infectious?
So first of all, I haven't done that experiment, and the question really is: do people think of themselves as liars in that point? By the way, one of the things that they did was they called their friends to participate as well. But I think that the people who've done that very quickly did not think of themselves as misbehaving. I think very quickly they thought of they basically lost all memory of behaving badly, and they would think of themselves as being angels. So, but what you're right about is, to the extent that they thought of themselves as behaving badly, then this could have been a starting reinforcement mechanism that would get them to behave worse and worse and worse over time. And we do have evidence for this, is that once people start behaving badly, if they know they've behaved badly, they go down a slippery slope. And we find this in the lab, and we also find this in discussions with all kinds of big cheaters, people who've done accounting fraud and insider trading and so on. And what you see in all of those cases is that once people start behaving badly, it becomes easier and easier and easier to take the next step.
Well, and it's interesting because if they're rationalizing, if they build this skill, as you call it, of rationalizing that they're not behaving badly, they're not going to anticipate any negative consequences.
That's right.
And so like with insider trading, as a great example, you even mentioned, most people assume they're not going to get caught because they're somehow rationalizing that they're not even behaving badly.
Yeah, so we've talked to some insider traders, and all of them basically said that when they started doing it, they felt that everybody was doing it, and that their particular version of insider trading was not as bad as what other people were doing. And one of them even told us that they didn't think about what they were doing as inside trading, of course, until the FBI caught them. And then they realized it was. But there is this incredible reformulation of what we do, and there's a separation between what we do and how we are good people, and our ability to rationalize is just fantastic.
So how do you know, again, in an effort for let's say even the listeners to improve their lives, obviously it's better to mostly be honest or to at least understand when you're rationalizing being dishonest. How do you work on kind of the reverse skill, understanding when you're rationalizing?
So this is the point where I'm incredibly grateful that we've come to the end of this hour, because this is a really complex question and something that will take a long time to answer. So I'm very happy that we ran out of time.
So there's no suggestion at all. We're doomed to be dishonest.
When we have another hour, I'll try and help you with that, but there's certainly not enough time now.
Well, I do recommend, I think it's a very good book, The Honest Truth About Dishonesty, How We Lie to Everyone, Especially Ourselves, which I guess came out like almost a year ago, a little more than a year ago. And I highly recommend, predictably, Irrational and the Upside of Rationality. We've spoken about how this can be used for sales techniques, how it can be used for self-improvement, how it can be used to understand pain and meaning a little bit more. And I think all of these books were excellent. Is there any other thing that you would like people to look at?
No, I'm fine.
Dan, thank you very much. I really appreciate you coming on the show.
It's a pleasure talking to you. Take care. Bye.
Thanks, Dan. Bye.
For more from James, check out the James Altucher Show on the Stansberry Radio Network at stansberryradio.com and get yourself on the free insiders list today.
AI might be the most important new computer technology ever. It's storming every industry, and literally billions of dollars are being invested. So buckle up. The problem is that AI needs a lot of speed and processing power, so how do you compete without costs spiraling out of control? It's time to upgrade to the next generation of the cloud, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, or OCI. OCI is a single platform for your infrastructure, database, application development, and AI needs. OCI has 4 to 8 times the bandwidth of other clouds, offers one consistent price instead of variable regional pricing, and of course, nobody does data better than Oracle. So now you can train your AI models at twice the speed and less than half the cost of other clouds. If you want to do more and spend less, like Uber, 8x8, and Databricks Mosaic, take a free test drive of OCI at oracle.com/advance. That's oracle.com/advance. oracle.com/advance.